Our show is about bringing the best practices in education to inspire, connect, and empower all educators by providing practical tips that can be used in the everyday school setting.
All right. Hello, and welcome to Coach Me If You Can. I am your host, Kristie Wurglitz, and I have Julie Hollamby here with me today, and we are going to speak with our guest star, Kelly Maher. I am an NSSEO district coach. My background is in special education. This is my 9th year in the field.
And I'm Julie Hollamby. I've been in OT for 11 years, and the last 6 years I've been hanging out here at NSSEO at Kirk School.
Kelly's work focuses on how to use evidence-based supports that facilitate the discovery of each person's own unique interoception experience.
And she teaches people to have self-advocacy and self-determination.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for joining us today on the Coach Me If You Can podcast. We can't express enough how excited we are that you're joining us here today. Do you mind just telling us a little bit more about yourself and what inspired you to start researching this topic, interoception?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. First of all, I am an occupational therapist. I've been working primarily in the school setting for 20 years. That is my passion. What got me interested in interoception, ever since I can remember starting as a baby OT, I've always been really interested in supporting the mental health and self-regulation needs in my students. And I always felt like there was something missing, but I didn't know what that was for a really long time. And I guess almost 10 years ago now, read about this thing called interoception, and the rest is history. It has completely changed the way that I support my clients and students.
So what do you think is one thing that you hope, if anything, our listeners will get out of today?
Understanding how interoception influences all of our lives. It's not just our students' lives, it affects us all. You know, I've been on my own personal interoception journey, and it's really profoundly impacted my own life. So hopefully that's a big takeaway from the podcast.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you talk about how it's not just for our students, right? It's for all of us. So the more that we can understand it, the more that we can help our students.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you, Kelly. The further I get into it and the more I'm working with my students, I'm realizing, hey, I never noticed this about myself before. So yeah, it really helps everybody.
Absolutely. I know. I think interoception work is so much fun when we do it all together and get all the staff involved, all the students involved. Yeah. And I don't know if your listeners know what interoception is. Do we need to?
If you could describe it, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so interoception is a sense within our bodies. It's the newest sense to be defined by neuroscientists. And it's really just about feeling our feels. Like, how does your body feel? Like, do you notice a growling stomach or a racing heart or tense muscles or hot skin? So all of those different sensations coming from our body, we are able to notice them because of this sense called interoception. And what scientists have found is these clues coming from our body, these feelings or sensations, whatever you want to call them, are important clues to our emotions and what our body needs for comfort. So maybe you notice that growling stomach and you have learned over time for you, that's a sign you're hungry and need food. Or maybe you notice a racing heart and have learned over time for you, that's your sign of anxiety. And that helps give you enough information to know what you need to get that, to meet your body's needs and to promote more comfort in your body. So, I mean, I was raised in a time where it was considered kind of weak to listen to your body, right? Yeah. You push through, no pain, no gain, clean your plate. You know, I didn't really grow up understanding the importance of my body and listening to my body. So this is a completely different mind shift for my own personal life, for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's probably pretty accurate for most of us. I mean, I think for me, it's like thinking about, yeah, I know when I'm hungry and some of those more basic needs, but even looking back at like, what does make me anxious? Mm-hmm. What is that feeling for me? How can I tell myself ahead of time, oh, I'm starting to get anxious?
I think probably, if a lot of your listeners think about, I'd love to hear, I know we can't hear from them, but I wonder what their own personal experience is. We hear from so many people like, oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. Like many times I'm just so busy, I don't take the time to listen, or like, and even our education system is not really set up to honor your body's needs. Like teachers have a bathroom break at 12:04 p.m. and they can go to the bathroom for 1 minute. And, so it's not like really based on the way their body feels. It's based on a schedule and a busy lifestyle.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we've been teaching interoception, the curriculum, for 2 years at NSSEO as OT, SLP teams. There's just so much language and vocabulary that our students need that we didn't feel confident to really move forward this without the support of our SLPs, and they're totally on board with us. When we're planning our lessons, we're incorporating mindfulness, awareness of body parts. We do the experiments to teach the vocabulary and language in very concrete ways. There's lots of repetition. And in some of our classrooms, we've connected the interoception concepts to the 5-point scale strategy. So when we do that, we're defining what does it look like to my staff, what does it feel like in my body, and what can I do about it? This process, because there's so much involved and so much for our students to learn and experience, is by nature just very slow. And our students do need a lot of repetition. So it's slow, but as therapists, we're seeing such great progress in our students. It's so exciting. But I wonder if there are some ideas that you could share with us that might help us be able to demonstrate that progress, as slow as it needs to be for each student, through the IEP process, so that parents and teachers and administrators can appreciate all the hard work that our students are really doing.
Yeah, I think just like finding all the little celebrations are so important. I do a lot of speaking with autistic adult Chloe Rothschild. I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but Chloe's work is amazing. So if you're listening, check out Chloe Rothschild. But she talks about how important it is for us to celebrate every little milestone, because to us it might seem small, but to her it is a big deal. So even if that's something small, like you're doing these experiments and at first a student like had no idea how their hands were feeling, and then one day they're like, oh, that made my hands feel cold. Holy cow, that is a huge celebration. Like sharing those success stories, I feel are so important. And I don't know about you, but I get guilty. I feel guilty sometimes. I'm very focused on outcomes, and sometimes I fail to notice the small little steps. So just, I guess, finding those little celebrations and everything we do is really important. And just sharing those little stories, I think, is sometimes more powerful than the data. I think that we obviously need to collect that, but the little stories is what makes the difference.
And I think that we do that in the classroom. We do that at school because in that moment, we are so excited to see them make that connection. But you're right. I think that we need to probably do a better job of reaching out to parents and saying, guess what happened today? And, reaching out to admin and saying, this student had this breakthrough today. So that's a great way to do it.
Yeah. And I think sometimes parents tend to hear more of like when there's a concern, or even admin, they tend to get involved when there's a concern. So really shifting that mindset can be a really big deal, I think, for all of us.
Yeah. Even for staff, sharing that success story can be powerful too, like really focusing on that reflection piece and what was so positive about this outcome can really help kind of drive our passion to continue that work.
Absolutely, for sure. We all need that fuel to keep on going.
Yeah. So as Julie talked about earlier, interoception is relatively new for not just Kirk School, but our district as a whole. What do you think are some steps that we can take as a district to support our staff to make interoception more of a tier 1 strategy?
I mean, I think just starting with helping people understand what interoception is. It's not the sexiest word. People they don't hear the word and they're like, ooh, I want to learn more about that. Right? So I think just starting like what you're doing, like educating people about this sense and how it affects their own lives, and then bring it into the students, and how, yes, sometimes this work can be slow for some students, but not for all. But what are the long-term benefits of this work? Interoception is giving someone knowledge about themselves and understanding what it is they need to be successful in life. It's not just like they're memorizing things like just generic rules, or they're just complying because someone told them they should do this and they might get a reward if they do it. It's like really you're giving them knowledge to not only be successful as a student, but also as an adult. And I think, many educators get into this field for that reason.
So when you're working with a staff and you're explaining and kind of educating them on these basic concepts, would you do some of the experiments with them?
Yeah. I'm just laughing because we do this a lot. And sometimes, some staff are like kind of like hesitant at first or like, because we are very playful. We are very silly in our work. We want it to be fun and engaging. And so it is like doing things like holding an ice pack or, jumping up and down, doing like really silly things. And, sometimes staff are like, I don't want to do that, but they start trying it and it's so much fun. And they really many times see the value of the work once we get them trying the experiments on their own.
So really bringing staff in by having them try with some of these experiments, because then that kind of shows them how powerful it is and what they can learn from it. And then that can kind of transfer over to how we can teach our students that.
Absolutely. I think we do need to have that experience first in order to be able to do it meaningfully with our students, for sure.
Right. And that almost reminds me of like the oxygen mask theory, where it's like you can't help your students until you help yourself first, right? You put on that oxygen mask first, and then you can help your students. You really learn about interoception first, and then you can successfully teach it to your students, right?
Absolutely. I love that analogy. Yeah. Put your own interoception mask on first. And boy, do we ever need those masks right now in education. Am I right?
Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
It's the perfect time to really dive into it, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
I have mentioned that we've been teaching the interoception curriculum for 2 years. Last year was really like our pilot program where only a few of our classrooms participated, but it was so successful with those students that this year, at least at Kirk School, most of our classrooms are participating in some way in the interoception curriculum. And so we are working really, really hard to collaborate with the other disciplines in our building who may use a more traditional behavioral approach, understanding that each area of expertise brings their own diverse perspective and their own way of supporting our students, especially during those maladaptive behaviors. But how can we bridge that gap between really honoring a student's interoceptive signals and the needs that they have to regulate themselves while still continuing to build the ability to be ready to work, or another way that we might say that is to comply with the expectations of their roles as a student?
I would say that many times a compliance-based approach, which is what education is largely rooted on right now, is largely invalidating of a person's inner experience. It's very surface. It assumes to understand why a person's doing that just based on a surface behavior. And what interoception is helping to do is shifting us to a place of curiosity. So compliance-based behavior models assume to know and understand why a person's doing this, and interoception is getting at curiosity, helping that student be more curious about what's going on and what they need for success, but also helping us, the educators, the school staff, be more curious about what that student needs uniquely for success. And I think sometimes when people hear there is a very big push out there about really reducing our focus on compliance and empowering these students with skills to do well, inspiring them to want to do well, right? Through relationship and connection. And I think that people, when they hear we need to stop compliance, they think the opposite of that is complete anarchy. And that's not what we're promoting at all. We're just promoting, it's more like compliance is extrinsic forms of motivation. We're rewarding, we're clipping up, we're clipping down, we're, doing all of those things. But interoception is about giving someone that internal motivation, that understanding of what my body needs, what I need to do well in this classroom. And it gives us that information as well.
I love that they do need that external motivation, but it has to come from inside themselves as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the research really supports that. There's a lot of research showing that that external form of motivation is not a long-term outcome. In fact, it has a lot of detriment. And we really need to get to a place of how do we inspire students to want to participate, to want to do well. And, I would even go as far as whenever I have a student that is not successful at participating, I always look at what I'm doing. What do I need to do differently to help this person, help this student to be more successful, to help inspire them to want to be with me and to want to participate.
Right, because we know that not all of our students are going to learn the same way and react the same way to all of our strategies and approaches. So sometimes we have to kind of bring in some of those creative ways of going about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, compliance puts all the blame pretty much on the student, right? And I think that, we do need to consider like what we can do more to help them succeed.
That's why I feel like interoception is so important, because our students want to do well.
Right.
They want to do well, but we need to help them figure out what they need to do well.
Right. It goes back to that quote where it's not kids do well if they want to, it's kids do well if they can.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly right. Absolutely. And the insights that I've learned through this interoception work about my students, like it's things I would never have learned before in the past with my old approaches. And it still blows my mind, some of the insights that these students give you. And you're like, oh my gosh, like that makes so much more sense as to why I'm seeing you do that in a classroom. And it's very much against what I would have assumed in the past, for sure.
Can I just add a quick follow-up question to that? We are struggling to help our colleagues understand that when we're honoring a student's interoceptive needs and we're giving them that more time that they need, and they're continuing to tell us that they're not ready to go back to their schedule, that's causing a little bit of friction. And how can we help a student facilitate engagement in the necessary tasks while we're still honoring their interoceptive needs?
Right. Yeah. And I think it's dependent like on every single situation and every single student. Obviously, safety is always number one. So we need to intervene, or the end of the school day, like that student needs to go home. So we need to figure out how to, in a most respectful way, help them transition to bus. But there's other times when, we need to consider like, what is it about the task why don't they want to transition back to that task? Like, can we adapt that task to make it more of a match for where they're at currently? Or maybe it is just a day where we need to be kinder. Like it goes back again to what I was talking about with my own self. Like I wouldn't sometimes give myself a day if I'm having a rough day and be like, you know what? I need to just like reduce the demands on myself, right? And I think that we need to give our students permission to also do the same. And I know that can be hard because there's so much pressure in education right now of, on staff, like you have to meet all these objectives and goals and all these things. And it's really hard. I think definitely the education system is beginning to shift and we're becoming a little bit more accepting of honoring interoceptive needs, but we definitely have a long way to go. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that question for sure. But whenever possible, if we can be a little bit kinder to all of our interoceptive needs, I think that it could go a long way to reducing the trauma that a lot of our students are experiencing on a daily basis.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That was a tough question. So thank you for that.
So I know that our district is relatively new to the interoception curriculum. We have a lot of our member districts who are not familiar with this at all. How would you go about recommending this to them or kind of bringing this to their attention?
I guess just through, we talked about they need to understand what even interoception is in order to be interested in why the curriculum might help them begin to embed some interoception supports in their school. And like, what are the outcomes that you're seeing? What would be the benefits to them to implement the curriculum within their schools? Maybe some success stories that, you're alluding to some of the cool things that you've seen your students experiencing and sharing some of those stories with those member districts.
Well, thank you so much for just your wealth of knowledge and all of your insightful information. I know that we're both really excited on kind of digging more into this and kind of seeing where our district can go with this. So thank you so much. Some of my main takeaways, I think actually my number one takeaway is just the fact that interoception is not a curriculum just for our students. It's really something that we have to take in and it influences our lives too. So something to think about is just how can we really recognize this within our own self, and then how can we carry that over to help our students? So just really knowing that it influences everyone, not just students. I think that's probably my biggest takeaway.
I actually had two things that are really sticking in my head. And one, it was a combination of you guys with the interoception oxygen mask, because I do think it's so important that if we don't understand and accept that in ourselves, it's much harder to understand and accept it in our students. And my second takeaway that will just stick in my head is that we need to try to replace some of our compliance with more curiosity.
I love that so much.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next portion of our podcast here is just to kind of go through some of our rapid fire questions. So really just think of the first thing that kind of comes to your mind as we talk about some of these questions. So what is something that empowers, inspires, or connects you?
Oh, gosh. Well, I have to say my daughters right now, they're 11 and 13, and they're just growing into their personalities, and they're very inspiring and empowering. Sometimes frustrating, but it's all of those words you said and more. But it really helps me then connect back to my roles in OT as well.
Okay, what's something new that you have recently learned?
How to make homemade pot stickers. My husband and I have gotten really into it. Yes. And we like stuff them all. We fry them up in batches. They're very delicious.
That sounds like a multi-sensory experience.
Yeah, we're going to have to look into that.
Seriously.
Who was your favorite teacher or educator growing up?
I think I have to say Mrs. Bradley. She was my yearbook teacher all through high school, and she was a powerful relationship builder. She was amazing. She just talk about inspiring participation. Like, she inspired us to all work so hard through her relationship building skills. She was amazing.
I love that that's what you remember about her.
Yeah, shout out to Mrs. Bradley.
For sure. What book are you currently reading?
Oh, Brene Brown's new book, Atlas of the Heart.
Oh, I just finished that. It's a good one.
So good.
On my list.
How far are you in it?
In the color illustration area. I have to get into the text. I just got it a little bit ago.
Well, you're going to love it. What is the best advice you have for an educator?
Remember why you got into education to begin with. Sometimes I lose sight of that with, getting caught up in all of our tasks and everything that we have to do, just remembering why, our why, as to why we got into this field to begin with.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important, especially in a time like now where, we're kind of still in that dumpster fire in a little bit, kind of hopefully coming out of it a little bit this year. But I love that. Always remembering your purpose and why you do what you do and what brings that passion to you, and how can you bring that to your students every day.
Yeah, it's really easy to lose that passion right now.
So most importantly, how can our listeners find you? How can they learn more about interoception? How can they learn more about you? Where do you recommend them getting all of that information?
Probably my website, kelly-mahler.com. We have lots of free resources on there about interoception and it links to all my social media too. So that's probably the one-stop shop right there, okay. kelly-mahler.com.
Awesome. We're going to put that in our show notes. So for any of our listeners that couldn't remember that, it's going to be right there in our show notes for everyone to easily click on and find you.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was so nice just to hear everything that you have to say. I know we're still learning in this.
Yep.
So we really appreciate you just taking the time and sitting down with us, and we just can't thank you enough. So thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much for your time, your thoughts, your experience, your inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. Join us next time for another session on the Coach Me If You Can podcast. We hope you tune in.